The Duke of Tolland set down the paper with her name on it, looked at her across the table for a long moment, and said, "I need a wife more than I need a helper." Hester Vale did not move. Everything she owned in the world was in the chest standing outside that door. 2 hackles wrapped in sacking, her father's steel, a comb, a Bible she could not read well, and 1 other gown. A bed at the inn on the quay was paid until Saturday morning. After Saturday there was the road, and there was nothing on the road she was walking towards, because the only rope walk in the county still laying cable was the one under this man's name, and she had just been told it did not want her. "I have come about the place of foreman," she said. "I know what you have come about." Then it is a strange answer to give me. Behind him, at the window, a fair, well-made man in a good coat laughed with his mouth closed, which is the way a man laughs when he means to be heard doing it and not seen. That was Fenwick, the Duke's agent, who had run the walk for 6 years and had not expected to spend his morning in a room with a woman in it. 3 days earlier, the carrier had put her down at the head of the reach, with her chest at her feet, and she had stood and looked at the walk for a long time before she went near it. It ran 1/4 of a mile along the water, low and long and black-tarred, with a roof like a barn stretched out and out until the far end of it went small. On one side the river, on the other the marsh with its ditches lying flat and shining. Inside, when she got the courage to put her head in at the door, the light came down the whole length in bars from the shutters and lay in stripes across a floor worn smooth as a table by 200 years of men walking backwards on it. It smelled of tar and hemp and cold ash. That smell had been the smell of her whole life until the summer the yards stopped buying, and her father's walk at the other end of the coast was sold for its timber, and she had stood in the road there too. A woman came out of the store at the head of the walk with a bundle under each arm and looked her over without hurrying. "You will be the one that wrote," the woman said. "Hester Vale, Ruth. I keep the hemp, and I weigh what goes out, and I have done since before His Grace could walk down this floor without falling over." She put the bundles on the bench. "They are seeing men today. 9 of them. How many have they seen?" 6, Ruth said. 2 came out looking at their boots, and 4 came out talking. Talkers are no good on a walk. A walk is a quiet trade. Hester had gone in and waited on the bench outside the counting room with her hands in her lap, and she had listened to a man in there explaining how he would put the walk right by putting more twist in everything, and had thought, well, that is 1 more of us gone. And now here she was in front of the Duke himself, a big dark man of 30 or so, with tar under 1 thumbnail, which she had noticed at once and thought about, and he had said a thing to her that had nothing to do with rope. "You had better explain it," she said, "or let me go, because I have 4 days." He turned the paper over as though the back of it might help him. 6 years ago this walk sent out cable that the yard condemned. Since then, everything we send is passed, and passed grudgingly, and every year they take less. I have put 3 men in over this walk. Every one of them has been talked out of his own judgment within the month by the man standing at that window, because a servant can be overruled, and a servant can be turned off. And I cannot dismiss him, because I have nothing against him but the smell of it. Then get something against him. I have been trying for 2 years. He looked up. A wife could not be turned off. A wife's word in the store and on the floor is my word, and there is no appeal from it, and every man here would know it in an hour. That is what I meant. It was not gallantry, and it was not an insult. It was the only lever I have. His Grace is tired, Fenwick said pleasantly from the window. There is nothing wrong with the walk that a good season would not mend. There is everything wrong with the walk, Hester said, and it was wrong before I got to the third shutter. The room went quiet in the way rooms do. Go on, said the Duke. Your hemp is short in the staple. She said it flatly, because it was flat, the length of the fibre before it is spun. Long hemp holds, because every hair of it has a foot of its neighbour to grip. Short hemp is cheap, and it looks the same in the bale, and it will spin, and what you get is a rope that passes the eye and does not pass a strain. And to hide it, somebody here has been putting a great deal more twist in, because hard spun yarn feels like strength in the hand, and is not. A yarn spun hard is a yarn with nothing left to give. It is like a man who will not bend at all. He does not last. Fenwick came away from the window then, and he was still smiling, and he said, That is a great deal of certainty from a person who has been on my walk for a quarter of an hour. Then let her have longer, said the Duke. They took her down to the low end, where the wheel stood with its 3 whirls and its crank, and a lad she did not know the name of yet came and put his hands on the handle and waited. Ruth tied a bundle of hemp round Hester's waist like an apron, the way it had been tied on her when she was 9 years old, and stood back with her arms folded. Whenever you please, said the Duke. Hester drew a lock of hemp out of the bundle at her hip with her left hand, thinned it between her thumb and 2 fingers until it was no thicker than a candlewick, wet it in her mouth, and laid it on the hook. She nodded to the lad. The whirl began to turn. Then she walked backwards down the walk. That is the whole of it, and it is not simple at all. The twist ran up the little tail of hemp to her fingers and wanted to run further, and her fingers were the only thing in the world stopping it. And out of the bundle at her waist, she fed hemp into it as fast as the twist ate it. No faster, and her feet went back and back over the smooth floor, and her eyes never went to her feet once. Too fast, and the yarn comes thin and hard and will break at the reel. Too slow, and it comes thick and soft, and is a waste of good hemp. The whole art is in the left hand, and it cannot be taught in a morning. She went 30 yards, 40, 60. The yarn behind her came out of the middle of her hand as even as a fiddle string, and it lay along the walk without one bunch or one thin place in it. And it did not once come near to parting, and the only sound was the wheel and the small dry hiss of the hemp going through her fingers. At 200 yards, she raised her right hand without looking, and the lad stopped the wheel, and she stood there breathing and holding the twist in. Ruth said, to nobody, Well, look at it before you say anything. Hester said to the Duke, Take it between your hands. Now pull. Harder than that. He pulled. The yarn came a little and stopped and did not break. It gave and then it held, she said. That is what you want, and you have not had it here in years. Now go and pull one off your own reel, and it will do the opposite. It will hold and then go all at once, and it will surprise you. She began to wind the yarn on her arm. Nothing in this trade holds by gripping. It holds by how much of its length it gives to the thing beside it. Fenwick said, Your Grace, this is a performance. It is a yarn, said the Duke, and it is better than anything on this walk. He sent Fenwick out. It took a little while, and it was not pleasant, and when the door was shut, he sat down on the end of the bench, which no duke ought to do, and put his hands on his knees. You have heard my offer, he said. It stands. I will not pretend it is anything but what it is. Then hear mine, said Hester Vale, because I will only say it once, and I am too tired to say it prettily. I will not be married for the use of my name. If If you want my hands, hire them, and pay me what you would pay a man, and I will make you cable that the yard will beg for. If you ever want the rest of me, you will have to ask for it on a day when you do not need one single thing from me. Not the walk, not the contract, not a name to hold over a man you cannot dismiss. On that day, you may ask. Not before, and I would not answer you before. And if you did ask me before, I would think less of you than I think now, which is more than you might suppose. He did not argue with her, which was the first thing that surprised her. What he did next surprised her more. He went to the table, took a sheet, and wrote for 3 or 4 minutes without saying anything. And then he called Ruth in and sent for Fenwick and made them stand there while he read it out. That Hester Vale was mistress of the walk in the article of hemp, spinning and laying. That her orders in those things were his own, and that they could be undone by nobody in the county except himself, in writing, in front of witnesses. Then he signed it and gave it into her hand, and it cost him something to do it in front of Fenwick, and everybody in that room knew it. There, he said, Saturday need not trouble you. The lad from the wheel carried her chest up to the little brick house at the head of the walk, where the master had lived when there was a master, and went away without waiting to be thanked. There were 4 rooms and a stopped clock, and a window that looked straight down the length of the roof to the water. She slept that night with the tide going out under the floor, and did not dream about the road at all. The walk was not a place, it was a set of conditions, and she learned them the way a person learns weather. It was too long to shout down, and so nobody shouted, and a message went from mouth to mouth up the floor like a bucket going along a line. It was cold in the morning at the low end, and warm by noon at the high end. It could not be worked at all in wet weather, because damp hemp spins heavy and takes the twist badly, and so the men watched the sky the way sailors do, out of the side of the eye, all day, without ever seeming to look up. And it had a thing lying at the tar house door that everybody wiped their boots on. It was a piece of old cable about a yard long, thick as a man's wrist, cut off square at one end and frayed out at the other, gone black and hard, and it had lain there so long that the flags were worn hollow where it sat. Hester stepped over it a dozen times a day for a fortnight and thought nothing about it at all, and that is worth saying plainly, because she was as blind to it as the rest of them. On the 4th evening the Duke came down the walk after the men had gone, as he did every evening now, because the paper he had given her meant that anything she wanted done had to be spoken to him and to nobody else. The book, he said, on the bench. You have written nothing in it. I have written what came in and what went out. That is a book. The rest of what you want is a letter, and I am not a good hand at letters. Tell me instead, then. So they walked the length of it together, which took a quarter of an hour at the pace he set, and she told him how much hemp stood in the store, and what she thought of it, which was little, how many men could spin properly, and how many had been taught to spin hard by somebody who thought hard was the same as strong, where the floor was broken at the low end, where the light failed. He asked short questions and did not once say anything comfortable. At the far door he said, "How long before the yard's cable can be laid? When is it wanted?" "On the 9th of October, 120 fathoms, and the ship comes off the blocks that week. And if the cable is not on the quay when their man comes down for it, we will not be asked again. Not next year, not at all. Then say the date to me every time we walk this floor," she said, "because I will be thinking about hemp and I will forget the world." "The 9th of October, he said. The first of them to speak to her properly was a spinner named Peg, who had been on the walk 11 years, and had a way of putting her chin down when Hester came near, as though passing under a low beam. It happened over a bad reel. Hester found it in the morning. A whole reel of yarn spun so hard it had begun to kink on itself and stand up in little loops like wire. "That is mine," Peg said, before anyone had asked. She was standing very straight. "You may say it in front of them. I would rather have it said. Who taught you to spin like that?" "Mr. Fenwick counts the reels," Peg said, "and a hard yarn goes further. And if a spinner brings in less than her count, she is put on the hackles at half the money. I have spun to that count for 2 years. I know what it is. My mother would have gone in the river before she let a yarn like that off her hand." "Then unspin it," Hester said. Peg blinked. "It is a whole reel. It is a whole reel of good hemp with too much in it, and it will come back if it is run out slowly and the twist let out of it a fathom at a time, and it will take you all day, and you will hate it by noon. And after that, you will spin to my count, which is a shorter count and better money, because I have written that on the paper, and there is no appeal from it. They will say you are soft. They will say a great many things," said Hester. "Let them get the hemp out of their mouths first." Peg turned the reel over with her boot and looked at it for a while. Then she said, in a low voice, and it plainly cost her, "There is a lad here spins worse than me, and it is not his fault either, and I have been letting him be laughed at to keep it off myself. I should not have." "No," Hester said, "but you have told me, and that is the end of it. Send him to me, and I will walk with him." The Duke saw the end of that. He had come in at the low door for no reason he could have named, and he stood in the dark by the tar house and watched a woman he was paying 12 shillings a week spend an hour of the walk's time teaching one clumsy lad to feed hemp with his thumb instead of his fingers, and not once let him see that she was tired. She did not know anybody was there. Nobody was going to tell her she had done it. He went back up to the house afterwards and could not settle to anything. It had put a kind of ache in him that he could not find the shape of. And he was still awake at 2, and the thing he kept coming back to was that she had not looked round once to see if she was watched. The next week, the window in the hemp store was taken out and glazed. She had said, only in passing, and to Ruth, not to him. That yellow light through a horn shutter made every bale in the place look the same colour, and that colour is half of grading hemp. Nobody said anything about it. She came in on the Tuesday and there was clean glass, and the whole store had gone grey and honest, and she could see at last that a third of what stood in there was the wrong stuff. And she stood among it for a long while, with her hands full of hemp and her throat tight, for a reason she did not care to examine. "He does not mention it," Ruth said. "Weighing, he never has. His father was a shouter. This one does the thing and walks off. And then, if you thank him for it, he is like a cat that has been picked up." "Ruth, tell me about the condemned cable. 6 years ago." Ruth put down the weight. She was a big woman with a face like a gatepost, and she did not enjoy it, and she told it anyway, because she had decided about Hester on the first morning and never went back on a decision. There was a master here then, Silas Bray, 41 years on this floor, and his father before him, and I will tell you what he was. He was the best pair of hands between here and Plymouth, and he had a tongue on him like a rasp. Then old Grace died, and this one came into it at 23 with the estate in a state and knowing nothing about anything. And the yard threw back a whole cable that summer, 120 fathoms, condemned on the quay in front of everybody. Whose fault was it? That was the whole matter, Ruth said. Silas stood there and said it was the hemp, that the merchant had sent short stuff, and he had been saying so all spring, and been told to make do. And Mr. Fenwick stood there in his good coat, very quiet and very reasonable, and said no. It was the walk. It was an old man's walk. It was Silas letting the spinning go slack, and here were the figures. And I have never in my life heard a man be so pleasant while he did a thing like that. And a boy of 23 had 2 men in front of him, and no way on God's earth to tell which of them was right, because he could not read a rope, no more than he could read Greek, so he did what he thought was the humble thing. He said, "I do not know enough to judge, and I will take the advice of the man who has the figures." And he put Silas Bray off this walk after 41 years. Hester said, "Where is he now?" 3 miles over the marsh in a cottage with a leaking end wall. And he has not set foot on this side of the ditch since. And he has not answered one letter, and there have been letters. Ruth picked the weight back up. He is not dead, mind. That is the whole trouble with it. He is 3 miles away, and alive, and has been alive every single day of those 6 years. And every day that man up at the house knows exactly where he is. Has he never gone himself? He rode out twice. He got as far as the gate both times. It was the Duke who finished it though, and he did not know he was going to. They were at the far end on a Friday, with the light going amber down the whole quarter mile, and she had asked him nothing, and he stood there turning a bit of yarn in his fingers and said, "Ruth has told you about Bray. Some of it. She will have told it fairly." He was quiet a moment. "The part she cannot tell is that I never looked at the cable. It was lying on the quay in front of me for 2 days. I looked at 2 men, and I chose the one who sounded like a man who knew. And I have thought since that I could have gone down and put my hands on the thing and asked it. It would not have answered me, but I would have gone down. You were 23. Do not do that," he said, without heat. "Everybody does that. It is meant kindly, and it takes the whole weight off. And I would rather carry it." She said nothing at all, which was the right answer. And they walked back up the length in the dark without talking. And at the door, he said good night, in a voice that did not sound like the one he used for anybody else. The floor at the low end was made good on a Sunday. It was 50 yards of broken flags where the wet came up. And she had never mentioned it to him. She had only, once or twice, in the middle of walking a yarn backwards, put her heel down and adjusted, because a spinner who trips loses the yarn and the twist and the temper altogether. Somebody had watched where she adjusted. On Monday there was new stone from the low door to the second post, laid flat and swept, and What the Hardener was standing on it with his hands behind him looking at it as though it might be about to do something. Sunday work, Watt said. 2 masons and himself. He carried, and all. I saw him. He carried. Like a labourer. His coat off in the road. Watt rubbed his nose. Mistress Vale. That thing you said about the hard yarn. That it has nothing left to give. Yes, I have been hardening rope on this walk since I was 15, and I did not know why we hardened it. Only that it was done so many turns, and that was the number. And I have been giving it the number Mr. Fenwick set, and I could feel it was wrong in my arms. And I never said. He looked at the floor. That is a thing to say out loud at my age. Then come and stand with me at the cone this week, Hester said, and I will show you what your arms already know. And you can tell me if I am wrong, because you will be able to feel it before I can see it. You would take that from me? What? She said. There is not one thing in this building I would rather have. And on the Thursday, laying, she found out what the Duke was for. 3 strands stretched the whole length, each one twisted up hard the one way, the wooden cone with its 3 grooves set between them, the sledge at the low end with its weights, which must be let forward as the rope shortens, and must be let forward at exactly the right rate, and there is no rule for it. Only somebody with their weight against it, feeling Fenwick's men had always chocked it and gone for their dinner. "Put your hands here," she said, "and lean, and do not let it run." He leaned. The rope came into being behind the cone the way it always does, out of nothing, 3 things becoming one thing, travelling up the walk at the speed of a man thinking, and he held the sledge back with his shoulder and his boots skidding, and she stood beside him with her hand over his on the bar, and for nearly 10 minutes neither of them spoke. When the cone came to the head of the walk, the strain came off all at once, and the sledge stood still, and the task was over, and her hand was still on the back of his hand. Neither of them took it away. She was aware of the whole quarter-mile of the building around them, and of every place in it where somebody might be standing, and she was aware that his hand had turned very slightly under hers, and that neither of these things had anything to do with rope, and that they both knew it. It went on a few seconds. Then, Watt called something from the far end about the tar, and the moment let go of them, and she found she had to say the next ordinary thing twice before it came out right. He said, "On the Saturday evening, at the far door, with the marsh going blue, I have never in my life been any use in this trade, and I was useful on Thursday for 10 minutes, and I have thought about it more than I have thought about the contract. That is a foolish way to spend a mind." "It is," he agreed, and did not take it back. They fell into an argument about the heron. It began because there was a heron that stood on the mud below the tar house every morning, and the Duke maintained that it was the same bird he had seen there as a boy, and Hester said that was flatly impossible, and he said he did not care for her tone. "It is 3 birds," she said. "It is at least 3. One of them has a crooked left wing, and one of them is grey all down the breast, and one of them is the little one that will not stand near the pile. It is one bird. It is a heron, not a duke. They do not go on forever. That," he said, "is the first genuinely improper thing you have said to me. It will not be the last." He came down at noon 3 days running to look, and reported each time that it was one bird, and on the 3rd day she asked him whether it was the crooked-winged one or the grey one, and he said, with enormous dignity, that it had had its back to him. Then he wanted to walk a yarn. "No," she said. "Why not? Because you will be bad at it, and you are not a man who enjoys being bad at things. That is a reason for it then." So she tied the hemp round him, which took some doing and was very funny to both of them, and set his hand on the hook, and told Peg to turn slowly, and he went backwards down the walk of his own rope walk, with a face of absolute concentration, and put out a yarn like a string of onions, fat, thin, and then a place with almost nothing in it at all. And then it parted, and the loose end flew up and hit him under the chin. Peg made a noise into her apron. Watt looked steadily at the roof. "Again," said the Duke. He did it 11 times. He got better, in the sense that a bad yarn is better than no yarn, and on the last one he went 100 yards before it went. And when it went he stood in the middle of the floor and said a word that his father had said, and that nobody had heard on that walk for 20 years. And the whole low end of the building fell about. "Your left thumb," Hester said. "It is doing what your mind is doing. When you think about the far end, you grip, and when you grip you starve it, and there is your thin place. So I am to think about nothing. You are to think about the inch in your hand." For a quarter of a mile. For a quarter of a mile, and then again tomorrow. And that is 30 years of a woman's life, she said. And that is why we are not talkative. He sat down on the sledge, with the hemp still round his waist like a fool, and looked up the length of the walk. How wide is my stride? Rather wider than the marks. How much wider? They were cut for your grandfather's men, she said. And I do not know, and there is no reason to know. And if you say one more word to me before dinner, I shall put you back on the wheel. It is one heron, said the Duke. The tide came over on the 23rd of September, at 2 in the morning, on a spring flood with the wind gone round into the east, and it came through the tide flap at the low end, which had been reported to Fenwick twice. Hester woke, because the smell was wrong. She got down the walk with a lantern, and her skirt already wet, and found the black water coming in flat and quiet across the good new stone. Not roaring, not dramatic at all, just arriving. And she stood for 2 seconds working out what mattered. The bales in the store, salt-soaked hemp rots from the inside, and cannot be spun in a year. The reels of yarn, and along the whole floor, hooked and waiting, the strands for the yard's cable, laid out and half-formed and worth 9 weeks. Then she started shouting, and there was nobody to shout to, and the first thing she heard back was the low door and his voice, and he had come down the road from the house in his shirt. They worked from 2 until first light, and it was not heroic. It was carrying. Bales up to the racks at the high end, 200 paces each, over and over, until the muscles in her back stopped reporting anything at all. The reels lifted and swung and hooked on the beams. The strands hauled up the slope of the floor hand over hand and coiled anyhow, which she would weep about later. And when the water was to their knees, they went back for the flap and could not shut it against the pressure, so he lay down in it, in the dark, and held a plank across the mouth with his shoulder, while she drove wedges by feel, and the water came up over his ear twice, and he did not move. And each time she felt for his face with her hand, and each time he said, "Go on," through a mouthful of the river. By 4 the flap was blind. By 5 the water stood still, and began, very slowly, to go. They sat on the racks at the high end with their backs against 9 tons of hemp, both of them soaked and black to the elbow, too tired to speak, and the light came up the reach and turned everything the colour of weak tea. And the heron came down out of the dark and stood on the mud below the tar house, as though nothing whatever had occurred. Hester began to laugh, and could not stop for some time. "Do not," he said. "Do not say it." "The crooked wing," she said. "The crooked wing," and put her forehead down on her wet knees, and his hand came up as though it would go on her shoulder, and stopped, and went back to his side, and both of them were aware of the exact distance it did not cross. "And where has this reached you tonight? Somewhere out of the weather, with the door shut. Stay a while if you can. There is a good deal of this river left, and the tide has not finished with anybody yet." Nothing was said about that night afterwards, which is how such things are handled in a working place, but the walk knew. It came out in small ways. Her name used properly by men who had said the woman for a month. The other end of a load taken up without asking. Her cup filled first at the tar house, which on a rope walk is very nearly a proclamation. It was 3 days after the tide that she looked at the thing at the door. She had bent to shift it out of the wet, because everything was out of place, and she was tidying like a woman possessed, and she got her fingers into the frayed end of it, and stopped. She was still bent over it a minute later. Then she carried it into the store, into the grey light of the new glass, and turned it in her hands, and knew what she was holding, and sat down on a bale. The cut end told nothing. A saw, tells nothing. It was the other end that spoke, the end that had parted 6 years ago on the quay in front of a Duke of 23, and it was drawn out long and soft like a fox's brush, 3 feet of it, hair after hair after hair pulled clean out of the grip of its neighbours, not one of them broken. That is what short hemp does. It does not snap. It slips, every fibbe sliding whole out of the twist, because it has not length enough to hold on by. Yarn spun too hard does the other thing entirely. It goes square, all at one line, every fibbe cut off short as a shaving brush, because it has been strained to death, standing still. Silas Bray had been right. He had been right on the quay, with everybody looking at him. And the proof of it had been lying at the tar house door, with everybody's boots on it, for 6 years. And Hester Vale put it back where it had been, in the hollow it had worn in the flags, and went and got on with the yarn. She did not say anything that day. She did not say anything the next week either. She told herself the reasons, and the reasons were good ones, that Fenwick still counted the reels and still had the merchant, that the 9th of October was coming, that a thing said too early to a room that has decided is a thing wasted. She was not lying to herself entirely. She was only leaving out the part where she was a woman with a bed and 12 shillings a week, who had been standing in the road in June. Fenwick came for her on a Thursday, alone, in the store. "You are buying hemp," he said. "I am, at £1 the hundredweight above what this walk has ever paid, from a house in Bridport that has never had our custom, on your own hand, and the whole of it charged to an estate that is not in a position to be generous." He said it kindly. That was his great gift. Everything came out of him at the temperature of a friend. "Mistress Vale, I am not going to fight with you. I am going to tell you what will happen, because I have seen it happen. You will be here until the cable goes. And then there will be a reckoning of the year's costs, and you will be a line in it. You will be the most expensive line in it. The hemp is long in the staple. Go and put your hand in the bale. I have no doubt it is very fine hemp." He smiled. "Do you know what I have been these 6 years? I have been the man who keeps this place alive on nothing. Every quarter I make the figures meet, and every quarter he looks at me as though something smells, and every quarter he signs. I have had no thanks, and I have expected none, and now he has found himself a woman who can spin a pretty yarn, and I am to be talked about. Nobody has talked about you. You have been to Bray's cottage. The store was very quiet. Somewhere down the walk the wheels started up. That is not a thing I need to answer for." "No," Fenwick agreed. "It is a thing that will be said, and there is a great deal of difference between the two." He picked up a lock of her expensive hemp and rolled it in his fingers and put it down. "I will tell you what I think, and then I will leave you in peace. I think you are honest, and I think honest people are the most dangerous instruments in the world, because they can be pointed. That old man has pointed you. 6 years he has sat over there, and now his hemp comes into my store, and his opinions come out of your mouth, and his price is on my account. When it goes wrong, and cable goes wrong, mistress, it goes wrong for no reason at all. Ask any of us. It will not be him standing on the quay. It will be you. And he will have got what he wanted twice over. You do not believe a word of that." Hester said slowly, "You are not even lying to me. You are practicing." For 1/2 second something went across his face. Then it was gone, and he was smiling again. And he said, "The 9th of October," and went out, and she stood there with her hands shaking. She had been to the cottage. She had been twice. The first time, in August, he had not opened the door. The second time was in the last week of September, 4 days after she read the cable, and he had let her stand in his kitchen while he mended a hurdle, an upright old man of 70, with a rasping voice and eyes like a hawk's, and he had asked her about the count and the tar and the state of the floor, and she had answered him honestly, all of it. And then Silas Bray had put down the hurdle and said, "There is a piece of it at the tar house door. Has anybody looked at that piece?" And Hester Vale had said, "I have not looked at it yet." He looked at her a moment, and then he picked up the hurdle again and said, "No, well, no reason anybody should." She got out of the cottage and across 2 fields before she stopped and stood in the wind with her hands over her face. Ruth was talking about a wedding at the far end of the parish. It was a wet Tuesday, and the walk was idle, and the two of them were grading in the store, and Ruth was going through the whole business of the bride's mother and her chairs, and Hester was working with her hands and hearing about 1 word in 5. "And he never comes down here for anybody," Ruth said. "That is what I keep telling them. 12 years I have known that man, and he never came onto this floor above once a month, and now he is down it twice a day, and the yard could burn, and he would be down it. Well, there it is." Hester went on drawing hemp across the teeth, and something in her went quietly over, the way a load shifts. Because it was true, and it had an explanation, and she had been avoiding the explanation for a month. He had been 23, and a man had stood in front of him and told him a true thing, and he had not been able to tell true from plausible, and he had taken that man's 41 years away from him. And here was another one. Here was a person with a trade in her hands and nothing else in the world, standing on the same floor, saying the same thing that the last one said, and this time he could not read the rope any better than he could then, but he could do the other things. He could glaze a window, he could lay a floor on a Sunday with his coat off in the road. He could sign a paper that no man in the county could overturn, and hold a plank in the river all night, and come down the walk twice a day for the rest of his life, and never once be in a position where somebody stood in front of him afterwards and said, "You had the proof under your boots, and you did not go and look." It was not her. It had never been her. She was the second time round. That was what all of it was. A man paying, 6 years late, into the only account still open to him, and it was the most decent thing she had ever seen anybody do, and it had nothing whatever to do with wanting her. And the terrible part, she thought, drawing the hemp through, the part that would sit in her chest for years, was that she could not even be angry, because if a man had done to her what he had done to Silas Bray, she would want him to spend the rest of his life laying floors for strangers. She was the floor. She was being laid. "Are you listening to me at all?" said Ruth. "The chairs," said Hester. "She should have hired them." "That is precisely what I said." She never said a word of it aloud, not that day nor after, and the only sign of it in the world was that when the Duke came down at 4, she talked to him about the tar for 11 minutes, and then found something to be doing at the far end, and she was careful not to look at what her own hands were doing while she did it. The cable was laid on the 6th of October, and it was the best thing to come off that walk in a decade. 120 fathoms, long staple hemp, spun to her count, hardened by Watt's arms, and it lay coiled on the quay the following morning, like something asleep. The yardsman came down on the 8th, a day early, with a clerk and a rule, and Fenwick met him on the quay with his hat in his hand and the estate's books under his arm. And by the time Hester got there, the thing had already been arranged, and it had been arranged well. "And I am afraid there is more," Fenwick was saying. in front of 30 people. The hemp for this cable was bought over my head at £1 the hundredweight above the market, on the sole authority of this woman, from a house named to her by Silas Bray, whom His Grace turned off this walk 6 years ago, and who has had her at his fire twice this autumn. I have said nothing all season. I say it now because that cable is going to a king's ship, and because a soft cable is not a matter of money. It is not soft, Hester said. It is spun to account nobody in this trade uses. She has taken the twist out of this walk, sir, by written order, and there is not a man here who dare contradict her. And that paper was got out of His Grace in a private room in the first hour she was in this county. He turned to the Duke, and he was not smiling now, and he did it very well. Your Grace, I have served you 6 years. I would say it if it cost me my place. I believe it will cost me my place. And the Duke of Tolland, standing on his own quay, with 120 fathoms of cable at his feet, and every face turned to him, looked at the cable, and looked at her, and did not say one word. He was still not saying anything when the yardsman asked her whether she wished to answer. Yes, said Hester Vale. But not that first. She looked past all of them, to the back of the crowd, where an upright old man of 70 stood with his hat in his hand, because she had written to him on the Sunday and asked him to come. And he had come. Mr. Bray, in the last week of September you asked me a question in your own kitchen, and I lied to you, and I am going to say what the lie was in front of these people, because that is where the wrong was done. The quay went quiet. 4 days before that, I picked up the piece of old cable at the tar house door, and I read it, and I knew what it said, and I knew it cleared you, and you asked me whether anybody had looked at that piece, and I stood in your kitchen, and I said I had not looked at it yet. Then I went away, and I said nothing for a fortnight, and I said nothing because I wanted my place. I was in the road in June, and I did not want to be in the road again, and I let a man of 70 go, on being the man who ruined this walk for 14 days longer. In a cottage, with a wall out, because it suited me. Nobody made me do it. Nobody would ever have known. That is mine, and I am not going to dress it. Silas Bray said nothing at all. He was looking at the flags. Now the hemp, she said, and she picked up the black yard of old cable from where she had set it, and held up the frayed end so that the whole quay could see it. 6 years this has been at that door, and every one of you has wiped his boots on it. Look at the end. Every hair of it is whole. Nothing here is broken. This did not snap. This slipped. Every fibre in it drew straight out of its neighbour's grip, because there was not length enough in the hemp to hold on by. Short in the staple, badly hackled, so the toe was left in it and went into the yarn. That is the merchant's fault, and the fault of the man who kept buying from him. That is one man's opinion. Fenwick began. When a rope is spun too hard, Hester went on, it does not do that. It goes square, all at one line, like a brush cut off. That is what Mr. Fenwick told a boy of 23 that this end was, and I would ask any man on this quay who has ever parted a hard-laid rope whether that end looks square to him. Nobody said anything. Then what said? It does not. And there is the last of it, Hester said. That cable in front of you is spun softer, because it is made of hemp that can afford to be soft. Cut a yarn out of it and pull it in your 2 hands, sir, and it will give, and then it will hold. The yard's man cut a yarn out of it. He pulled it. It gave, and then it held. It was Peg who finished it, and it cost her everything she had. I spun to Mr. Fenwick's count for 2 years, she said, and her voice went all over the place. And he set it, and he set it because a hard yarn goes further, and there is more of it to sell out of the same bale. And if you brought in short of the count, you went on the hackles at half money. And I have a mother. That is on his book, in his own hand, and it is on mine too. And I am not fit to stand here, but I am standing here. Peg, said Fenwick, you have been misled by, and they all heard it stop. It stopped in the middle, the pleasant voice, like a wheel when the band comes off, and he stood on the quay with the estate's books under his arm, and began again, and got 4 words out. And then he looked round the faces on that quay, one after another, at Watt, and at Ruth, and at the yardsman, and at the Duke, and understood that the room had already decided, and had decided some time ago, and that he had been talking to nobody for a full minute. He did not shout. He was not a fool. He put the books down on the bollard very carefully, and squared them, and took his hat, and what was underneath was not wickedness at all. It was a man of 45 who had been right for 6 years, because being right was the whole of what he had, and who had just watched it go. He walked up the quay through them, and nobody said a word to him, and nobody pronounced anything at all. That was the worst that could have been done to him, and it was done by leaving it undone. At the top of the slip he stopped, and half turned, as though there might yet be some sentence, and there was not, and he went on and was gone round the tar house, and the tide went on coming in, and it was over. The hemp store at dusk smelled of dust and rope and rain coming. Hester had her chest open on the bench, and was putting the hackles into the sacking, one and then the other. And Ruth stood in the doorway with her arms folded, and let her get on with it for a while before she spoke. He will not let you go. He does not get everything he wants. You have just handed that man back his whole life on the quay in front of the county. I handed it back a fortnight late, Hester said, and I stood in his kitchen and lied to his face to keep abed, and everybody here now knows that about me, and they will be kind about it, which is worse. She rapped the steel. I am not going because I am ashamed. I am going because of the other thing, and I am not going to say the other thing to you, Ruth, so do not stand there. Ruth stood there. Nothing in this trade holds by gripping, Hester said at last, to the sacking. It holds by how much of its length it gives to the thing beside it. I have known that since I was 9, and I have never once done it, not with a single soul, and a woman who cannot do it has no business making rope for anybody. That, said Ruth, is the stupidest thing I have heard on these premises, and I was here for Mr. Fenwick. The carrier goes at 8. He goes at 8 on Thursdays. Then Thursday, said Hester, and shut the chest, and Ruth went out into the wet without saying good night, because she was too angry, and there was nobody else in the store at all. In the morning, the cable went aboard the yard's barge, and half the parish came down to watch it go, and when the last fathom was in, and the barge swung off on the ebb, the Duke of Tolland turned round on his own quay and looked for her until he found her at the back by the tar house. He came down through all of them. He was not good at it. He had plainly had words ready, and they had plainly gone. The cable is delivered, he said. The yard has asked for 2 more before Lady Day, and they have asked for them in writing. Bray is coming back on Monday to take the walk, and he has said yes, and I have got nothing left that I need. He stopped, started again. That is not. I said that badly. What I mean is that there is nothing here I want from you. Not one thing. Not the walk. There is only the other. Adam, when he stood up there yesterday and said what he said about you, the Duke went on. I looked at the cable. Do you understand what I am telling you? I stood on this quay with a man in a good coat talking, and I waited to see the evidence, and I did the identical thing I did when I was 23, and I did it to you, and I have not slept. His voice went, I am not asking you to say it was nothing. It was not nothing. I knew what you were in the first hour, and I said nothing for as long as it took a man to be clever at you, and I will be sorry about that in 10 years' time. You are supposed to be asking me something. I am asking, he said. There is a day when a man does not need anything. This is it. I have no other one. And Hester Vale, in front of Ruth and Watt and Peg and the yards clerk and every soul on that quay, took 2 steps and took hold of the front of his coat and kissed him, and he got his arms round her about a second later, like a man catching something falling, and the whole quay made the noise a quay makes. Silas Bray took the walk on the Monday and had the tide flap out by Wednesday, and told the Duke to his face and in front of witnesses that he had been a young fool, and then shook his hand for a long time, and neither of them managed to say anything else, and both of them were satisfied with that. He lived in the brick house at the head of the walk and ate his dinner at the great house on Sundays. And never once in the years afterwards did he mention a fortnight in September, though it lay between him and Hester like a stone in a field that 2 people plough round and both know is there. Peg was not turned off. She went on the fine hackles at full money and taught the clumsy lad herself, badly and loudly, and he came right. Fenwick went to a wharf at Ipswich and did the figures there, and was, by all accounts, very good at it, and made the sums meet, and was not thanked, and was not ruined either. They were married in the parish church in the first week of November, with the tar still under his thumbnail, and Ruth wept furiously all the way through, and denied it afterwards. And in the spring, in the counting room at the great house, a man came in off the road with his hat in his hands, and asked whether there was any work going on the walk. Hester was at the table, with the book in front of her. Behind her, in the doorway, leaning on the frame with his arms folded, was the Duke of Tolland, who had come to say something about a heron, and had thought better of it. She did not offer the man a wife, and she did not offer him a wage. There is work, she said. Come down to the low end, and put a bundle round your waist, and walk me a yarn, and we will see what your left hand knows. Everything on this floor begins there. She got up and took her shawl off the chair. Mind the piece of old cable at the tar house door. We do not wipe our boots on that any more. So, what is lying at your own door that you have stepped over so many times you have stopped seeing it at all? Have a look at it this week, and then come back and sit with me a while, because there is another tide coming in, and another story on it.